Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night to everyone. Like many of you, I've been waiting for the new Dragon Age installment ever since it was announced back in 2018 under the name Dreadwolf. Like many, I met the first trailer for what would become Veilguard with skepticism. It was, to put it lightly, underwhelming. And like many, every time I stumbled upon another article about the game with its seemingly constant focus on LGBT themes, I found myself facepalming wondering why, for what purpose, and who exactly is this for? But I clearly remember that before Inquisition was released, fans of the series felt the same way. The skepticism was off the charts. People compared Inquisition's trailer to the incredible ones for Origins and Dragon Age 2, rejected the new stylistic changes, and criticized the gameplay footage, claiming it didn't measure up to Origins. When the game finally came out, opinions were split. Some saw it as the worst game BioWare had ever made, while others thought it wasn't nearly as bad as the backlash suggested, especially among those who played it through to the end. Inquisition was the reason I bought a PS4. At the time, upgrading my PC would have been far more expensive, and I was determined to play the game. All in all, if I combine the hours spent on my first playthrough and the time logged on EA's client later, I have spent around about 200 hours in Inquisition. The game itself was a mixed bag. On one hand, it had a solid story, decent companions, with some exceptions, engaging dialogue, a world full of beautiful landscapes, and even some great humor. But on the other hand, it suffered from excessive grind, stunning yet painfully empty locations, lackluster side quests, and the frustrating limit of 8 ability slots. And the downside for me personally was the Frostbite engine because the characters just look plasticky. So, despite all the news and reviews leading up to the release of the next installment, which didn't exactly inspire confidence, I made up my mind. I needed to play Veilguard myself. And I ended up clocking about 70 hours exploring every corner of the game. However, while I started Inquisition with the feeling of, alright, this doesn't feel like the old Dragon Age, but I'll give it a shot, and eventually grew to appreciate its innovations, finishing on a positive note, my experience with Veilguard was, let's say, different. The deeper I delved into the story, the more often I found asking myself, why? That said, I don't entirely agree with the outrageously negative reviews out there. First of all, judging by the footage they use in their videos, most of these reviewers barely played 2 or 3 hours of the game. Their credibility isn't much better than the journalists they criticize for being sellouts or chasing hype. Secondly, nearly all these reviews regurgitate the same points, nitpicking to such an extreme that if they approached Origins with the same zeal, they'd probably call it an unplayable mess. Like, come on, even the thumbnails of these videos all look the same. And the biggest issue, when you listen to their critiques, it's like Origins and Veilguard are the only games in the series. It's as if Dragon Age 2 didn't exist, a game that, by the way, had some of the best companion interactions. It's the only game in the series where you can develop rivalries with your companions so intensely that one of them might side with you in the finale purely out of spite, just to watch you fail. Most of these reviewers don't mention Inquisition at all, failing to see Veilguard as a natural evolution of the third game rather than the first. Yes, I will admit, my final verdict aligns with the consensus. Veilguard has become a disappointment for me, but not because of the inclusion of characters like the non-binary Taash, for instance. The disappointment stems from the fact that Veilguard could have been Dragon Age's equivalent of Mass Effect 3, but a better version. A brilliant conclusion, full of drama, humor, epic scope, and emotional weight. Instead, something broke along the way. Throughout my playthrough, I couldn't help but notice instances where I thought, here's a great idea, only for it to feel abandoned halfway through. It is as if the developers lacked courage, creativity, or maybe someone interfered in the process, leaving those ideas half-baked or, worse, mangled into something barely acceptable. If I were to describe Inquisition as a flawed yet ultimately enjoyable game, then Veilguard is a chain of missed opportunities. As I sat watching the credits roll, my mind was racing with thoughts of what could have been if only they had stuck to the game's original concept. And that is what I want to talk about in this video. So, how could Veilguard have been the perfect continuation of the series? There is a book called The Art of Dragon Age, the Veilguard Deluxe Edition. It's a collection of early development materials, including concept art created by the artists and writers during the initial stages of the project. These materials lay the foundation for the game, serving as a framework to which details are later added to weave all the events together. It is clear that there are significant differences between the original vision for the game and its final version. However, if you compare this to a similar book about Inquisition, you'll notice that roughly half of the initial concepts made it into the final game. Some were slightly altered, while others were completely abandoned. Having completed Veilguard, studied the concept art from the book, and added a touch of imagination, I have reconstructed the game's narrative as it was likely intended in its early stages. Everything that follows is merely my interpretation of the events, but hear me out. For those who've already played the game, try to imagine what Dragon Age 4 could have been like. And on a side note, it's worth mentioning that Rook's canonical appearance was designed as a human woman with fair hair. The events of Dragon Age 4 take place shortly after the conclusion of the Trespasser DLC. Across Thedas, an exodus of elves begins as thousands rally under the banners of Solas, who has revealed himself as an ancient elven god from the distant past. One of the elves arriving from Tevinter is named Riva. Thedas is in a state of political turmoil. First, tensions between the Qunari and Tevinter are escalating, threatening to ignite a new war between these old enemies. Second, Solas's declaration of himself as an ancient elven god undermines the teachings of the Chantry, the faith in the Maker and Andraste. In response, the Divine declares a new exalted march and sends ships north to capture Solas and restore peace to Thedas. Through the Inquisition spy network, the Inquisitor, the protagonist of Dragon Age Inquisition, learns that Solas is searching for a mysterious artifact. He assembles a small group, led by a character named Rook, and sends them north on a covert mission. Meanwhile, the Inquisitor focuses on tracking Solas himself and maintaining peace in the south. Rook and his group first travel to Ravane, where they encounter Isabella. She joins their team and provides a ship that will allow them to continue their journey. Thanks to Isabella's skills, they're able to infiltrate Tevinter territory unnoticed. This stealth is crucial for the following reason. The Chantry and Tevinter have always had a strained relationship, and the declaration of an exalted march, along with the deployment of ships to the north, is seen as a direct threat by Tevinter. Regardless of whether the Inquisition was absorbed into the Chantry or disbanded, its members remain closely associated with the Church. Their presence in the heart of the Imperium could easily push Tevinter into declaring war on Orlais. Rook and her group manage to infiltrate the capital of the Imperium, Minratus. Their search leads them to the Black Market, where they discover an artifact from Dragon Age 2, the Red Lyrium Idol. However, it soon becomes clear that Rook's group isn't the only one pursuing the artifact. Another team of Seekers, led by Calpurnia, arrives at the Black Market around the same time. For those who might not remember, Calpurnia was one of the antagonists in Inquisition. She can be recognized by her distinctive belt and hair color, as shown in the concept art. A fight breaks out between the two groups, but before it can escalate further, Solas steps out of an alluvion located in the same room. It's revealed that Riva, one of Calpurnia's companions, betrays her team and kills one of its members. Solas then petrifies one of Rook's allies. A chaotic skirmish ensues and alarms are raised. Half the members of both teams perish, forcing the survivors to join forces to escape. Fighting their way out, they retreat through the city sewers, aiming to reach Rook's ship. Solas, aided by Riva, obtains the Red Lyrium Idol. He purifies it, removing its corruption, and transforms it into a dagger made of pure lyrium. Rook, Calpurnia, and the others make it back to the ship, though tensions remain high within the group. Around this point, Dorian joins the players' team. As a Tevinter Magister, he sheds light on Riva's past. Since Solas leaves no trace behind, Rook and the group decide to follow Riva's trail, which leads them to Navarra. In Navarra, Rook and her companions infiltrate a grand ball. By the way, this sequence is partially realized in Veilguard as part of Emmerich's personal quest, where a similar ball infiltration occurs. However, it's unclear why stealth is required in this instance or how Riva connects to Navarra. But there Rook discovers that Solas needs the idol for a mysterious ritual. It is also revealed that Riva is one step ahead and has already begun the next stage of their plan. It seems this is where the second act of the game would have begun. In northern Thedas, a war erupts between the Qunari Antam and Tevinter, instigated by Solas and his lieutenant Riva through manipulation and blackmail. Rook and her team return to their ship from Navarra, where the Inquisitor is already waiting for them. They engage in a dialogue, exchanging updates and trying to piece together all the events to understand Solas's true plans. From the illustrations, we see the Inquisitor assigning Rook a new mission, to head north. The concept art suggests that the second act offered numerous branching paths. For example, Rook's companions argue about where to go first, Parv Volin or the Tevinter city of Ventus, which holds strategic importance. Across the strait from Ventus lies Seheron, a contested territory of the Qunari. Rook, as the group leader, would have to resolve these disagreements and unify the team. Helping her in this difficult task would be Calpurnia. Interestingly, that a similar choice, albeit in a simplified form, exists in the Veilguard, where the player decides whether to head to Treviso or Minrathus. This choice influences one of the companions, Nerv or Lucanus. It is unclear what consequences would stem from the decision of where to go first, but resolving the conflict between factions would have involved several approaches. For example, Rook could meet with Archon Radonus diplomatically or attempt a covert infiltration into the Magister's quarters. Alternatively, Rook could aid one faction by eliminating the leaders of the other. This is evident in the concept art. In one scenario, Rook collaborates with the Kunari, planning something against the backdrop of a Tevinter city, while in another, she stands amidst the bodies of slain Kunari, surrounded by mages. We can only guess how this would have been implemented and how impactful the decisions might have been. Interestingly, one concept art depicts some of Rook's companions betraying them, siding either with the Kunari or Tevinter. Perhaps this would occur if Rook failed to resolve internal team disputes. Nevertheless, during their mission, Rook and her team learn that Solus, through blackmail, manipulation, and his enforcer Reva, is trying to lure the armies of Tevinter and Antam into the Alatan forest. There, he plans to perform a massive ritual using blood magic and a dagger of pure lyrium to tear down the veil and resurrect the fallen Elven Empire. Here, I must admit, I couldn't quite come up with a coherent explanation of how Solus would manage to lure both armies into the Alatan forest, despite Rook's efforts to stop him. However, based on notes in the concept art, it's clear that even if Rook managed to stop the war by convincing both sides they were being manipulated, Solus's agents would have planted devices around both armies' camps. At the critical moment, everyone within these devices' range would be killed. Rook and her companions managed to destroy these spheres, after which they ventured deep into the Alathan forest to find Solus and stop the ritual. I would like to speculate that at this stage the group would split into two teams. One, led by Rook, would confront Solus, while the other would focus on destroying the spheres, distracting Solus's agents. Again, something similar appears in Chapter 11, where players choose who will divert the Venatori forces, Harding or Davrin. The next segment takes place in the Arlatan forest. The team moves deeper into the woods, eventually noticing Solus beginning his ritual. The team battles demons and Solus's loyal elven followers, reaching the ritual site where Reva awaits them. Behind Reva, an Alluvian portal opens through which the silhouette of the Dreadwolf is visible. The heroes defeat Reva and step through the Alluvian. Incidentally, this scene also appears in the Veilguard at the very start of the game. The companions find themselves in a chamber where Solus, using a lyrium dagger, stabs elves lying on altars. Their essence is siphoned into a sphere at the room's center. In reality, this artifact isn't a sphere but a cube, as shown in later, more detailed concept art. It played a significant role in the original storyline, as you will see later. However, this concept was entirely absent from the Veilguard. A similar cube appears only in a memory of Solus accessed at the lighthouse, but that's it. Either because Solus's spheres were destroyed or due to Rook's direct interference, the ritual goes awry, and something far more terrifying emerges from the Veil. Two ancient elven gods, Elgarnan and Gillanine. Curiously, Gillanine's appearance at this stage of the game is vastly different from how she is portrayed at the beginning of the Veilguard. Here, she's depicted as a tall, muscular and beautiful woman, yet in the concept art for the finale, she's shown in her altered form, the same form we see in the Veilguard. Why this change was made is unclear to me. And there is another concept that I think many, not just me, will regret was scrapped. After the Elven Guards are freed, a magical explosion occurs, pulling Rook into the Fade. It is unclear whether she ends up there alone or with Solus. But the idea was that to escape the Fade, Rook would be aided by a character left behind by the Inquisitor in Dragon Age Inquisition. In the Here Lies the Abyss quest, the Inquisitor could leave behind Hawk, Alistair, Loghain or Stroud, and here Rook was meant to meet one of them in the Fade. A note suggests an episode where we'd learn how physical time in the Fade had affected the character who stayed behind in the third game, and what influence they might have on the story moving forward. This idea partially survived in the Veilguard. In Chapter 11, the protagonist enters the Fade and Solus finds a way out. However, since importing decisions from previous games isn't supported in the Veilguard, except for three: whether the Inquisition was disbanded, who the Inquisitor romanced, and how the Inquisitor parted ways with Solus. Rook is guided out of the Fade by Varric, who, it turns out, has been dead throughout the game and resides in the Fade. I have read comments on various YouTube videos where people were upset about Varric's death and how his story could end like this. Personally, I thought it was a pretty clever narrative twist, although throughout the playthrough I kept wondering, why is Varric wrapped in bandages the whole damn game? When will he get back on his feet? And then, bam, it all made sense. But just imagine how dramatic it could have been if you left Hawk in the Fade. Hawk had a romance with Isabella, and together with Rook, they escaped the Fade, and when Hawk reunited with his beloved. Isabella travels with us throughout the game if someone forgot, or if it had been Alistair. Equally cool, and I will explain why later. But all of this remained on paper, leaving us to wonder just how dramatic that episode could have been. Once Rook manages to escape the Fade, the third and final act of the game begins. From this point onward, piecing together a cohesive picture of the storyline becomes challenging. Concept art often consists of only 1 or 2 sketches scattered across different pages of the book. Still, using a bit of imagination and relying on the plot of Veilguard, I attempted to reconstruct what I believe the writers originally intended for the game's final third. Several significant events shape the hero's path in Thedas. First, the taint, unleashed from the Veil, infects the Olatan forest. It rapidly spreads, corrupting everything in its path and encroaching on neighboring territories, eastern Tevinter, western Rivain, and the northern borders of Antiva. A new blight begins. Second, Gillanine arrives in Tevinter with her Kunari captives. Behind her, the archdemon Razikil can be seen. It appears that she seizes control of Tevinter. And yes, notice her appearance. It still differs from how she was portrayed in Veilguard. Third, in the west, near the Hunterhorn Mountains, the dwarves begin an exodus. Terrified by something in the deep roads, they emerge to the surface in the thousands. And most importantly, fourth, at some point during this act, Morrigan introduces Rook and her team to the hero of Ferelden, the Grey Warden, the protagonist of Dragon Age Origins. I arrived at this conclusion for several reasons. Veilguard repeatedly emphasizes that this blight is different, the Darkspawn behaves strangely, and the taint appears alive. In Chapter 8, when Rook reaches Weishaupt, if you try to reason with the First Warden, he says,
First Warden, you're confused. Notice the blood in your ear. It's the calling, isn't it? The archdemon's messing with your mind while its master mocks you.
Additionally, there's a side storyline involving Antoine and Evka. It begins with Antoine asking for help in studying the taint. Later, we learn from them that the taint whispers strangely to the Grey Wardens. Quietly, hypnotically, and resisting it has become increasingly difficult.
I almost hear voices in it. The gods calling the blight.
We knew things were bad. But if the blight's being called, the situation's more unpredictable than we thought.
However, this plotline leads nowhere in the game. In Dragon Age Inquisition, Liliana, Morrigan, or Alistair mentions that the Warden is seeking a way to break the calling. In the quest contact hero of Ferelden, the Warden sends a letter explaining that his task is as important as fighting Corypheus because only the Grey Wardens can battle Darkspawn and end the Blights. If we look at the Dragon Age series, we will see. Origins explores the Grey Warden's role in combating the Blight. The second game, while centered on the Mage-Templar conflict, is catalyzed by the Red Lyrium idol, tainted with the taint, discovered by Hawke in the Deep Roads. Inquisition delves into Corypheus, an ancient magister who entered the Black City and was infected by the taint. Veilguard raises the stakes even higher, forcing players to confront elven guards who were tainted and sealed behind the veil by Solus. In my opinion, the Grey Wardens should have played a pivotal role in the game's finale. They are the only ones capable of standing against the elven gods and their archdemons. One detail that slipped my mind. In Veilguard, Gillanine attacked Weishaupt. What was her goal there? She and Elgarnan needed to forge another dagger, this time from Red Lyrium, to tear down the veil completely. And the Wardens? Let them stay cooped up in Weishaupt and Adamant, amusing themselves however they want until it is too late. I suspect that in the original script, the elven gods aimed to eliminate the Wardens using the calling. This would have brought the hero of Ferelden to the forefront, having found a way to avoid the calling. And since the fourth game was a direct continuation of Inquisition, the Warden's storyline would have reached its logical conclusion, proving that his quest wasn't in vain. And finally, as indirect evidence supporting my theory, consider this. Similar to Inquisition, Rook should have had advisors in the fourth game, at least 3 of them, Isabella, Dorian, and, drumroll, Morrigan. These characters were meant to be significant, providing advice and unique skills. Isabella's inclusion makes sense. If we assume the heroes traveled across Thedas by ship, her expertise in smuggling, piracy, and her title as the Queen of the Eastern Seas make her a logical choice. Dorian is another obvious pick, a mage from Tevinter who became a magister after the events of Inquisition. He would fit perfectly in Josephine's role as a diplomatic advisor. It is plausible that thanks to his help, Rook and her team were able to infiltrate the black market in Act 1, as Dorian can be spotted among the participants in that episode. And finally, there is Morrigan. You might argue her role was to provide information about the Fade, Illuvians, and ancient artifacts. After all, she's connected to Mythal. But then I would ask, what if the Inquisitor drank from the Well of Sorrows in the third game? What then? Veilguard has its flaws, but in my opinion, the game's key issue lies in the character editor. but not because it lets you add scars from medical operations or, heaven forbid, choose pronouns, which every self-respecting reviewer seemed to highlight. For example, Baldur's Gate 3 also lets you choose pronouns or create a female character with a big dick, but it doesn't make the game any worse. The real problem is that Veilguard lacked Dragon Age Keep, an essential feature of the series. Before starting Inquisition, you had to spend about half an hour configuring your world state by setting up the choices you made in the previous games. In Veilguard we got, I don't know, I wouldn't even call it scraps. Why was Dorian in the game at all? Anyone else could have filled his role. And Isabella, one of the most vibrant characters from the second game, is reduced to an arena arbiter. Fantastic. Couldn't anyone else have done that? It feels like the developers didn't dare cut these characters entirely, so they left them in as cameos. But honestly, it would have been better if they hadn't appeared at all. So, this is why I believe that the original concept and intended roles for these characters were entirely different. What does Morrigan have that others don't? Her connection to the Grey Warden, the protagonist of Dragon Age Origins. So let's consider the events from that perspective. The Warden should have told Rook that they needed to head west, help the Grey Wardens overcome the Calling, and enlist their support in fighting the Blight. That's why the final stage of the game would logically have taken place in Anderfels. After the interrupted ritual, a bond forms between Rook and Solace, allowing the elf to visit Rook in her dreams. The book includes illustrations that delve into the lore of the universe. How, long ago, the elves were once spirits who discovered dwarves worshipping the Titans. These spirits desired physical forms for themselves. They used the flesh of the Titans to create their first bodies, thus becoming elves and starting the first war against the Titans. Eventually, one elf, later known as Solace, performed a ritual of tranquility on the Titans, sealing their souls within a mysterious cube, the same one depicted in concept art at the end of Act 2. Solus, Mythal, and Elgarnan brought this cube back home. Because of the tranquility ritual, the dwarves lost their ability to use magic. With no other choice, they retreated underground, taking refuge within the bodies of dead Titans. Meanwhile, the Elven Empire flourished, reaching unimaginable heights thanks to the Titans' souls. This art depicts the outline of the Golden City itself, confirming a long-standing fan theory that this city once belonged to the Elven Pantheon. However, the Elven leaders, who declared themselves gods, grew arrogant and power-hungry, drawing more and more energy from the artifact that contained the Titans' souls. Their corruption twisted this power, giving rise to the Blight. Solace and Mythal tried to stop them, as shown in the illustrations, but they failed. In desperation, Solace used blood magic to seal the Blight and magic behind the veil, binding its existence to the Elven gods. Stripped of much of their power, the elves were doomed to fall under the onslaught of other races. Years later, several Tevinter Magisters used blood magic to enter the Fade and reach the walls of the Black City. There, they found the Elven gods, corrupted by the Blight, and returned to Thedas as the first Darkspawn. These events remained largely unchanged in the final version of the game. The difference is that this information was originally meant to be revealed through Rook and Solace dream conversations. In Veilguard, you instead uncover it by finding frescoes containing Solace's hidden memories at the lighthouse. Another interesting fact, it seems that throughout Act 3, Rook needed to find a way to break her connection with Solace, otherwise she would die, which would lead to one of the game's endings. Either way, the journey took Rook and her companions to Anderfels. They were tasked with discovering the Thaig of Kelsharok, which led to a new section of the Deep Roads. From the images, it seems this segment required significant time. The illustrations show Rook descending deep underground, uncovering massive stone effigies of the Titans. There, Rook and her team found the body of the last Archdemon Lusarkan, encased in stone, a being tied to Elgarnan. It is unclear how the story intended to explain the Archdemon's presence among the dead Titans. But this brings us back to the Grey Wardens, whose help was essential in combating the Blight. By this point, it seems the Grey Wardens in Weishaupt had begun succumbing to the Calling, turning into Darkspawn. Rook and the hero of Ferelden needed to perform a ritual to free the Wardens from the Calling. Some may have died in the process, while others might have become half-ghoul like Larius from the Second Dragon Age. Still, their combined efforts would ultimately save the Order. Then came the finale. Rook, her companions, and the Grey Wardens faced Ghilan 9, Elgarnan, and 2 Archdemons. By the end of the game, Ghilan 9 was already corrupted, the Wardens killed the Archdemon Lusarkan, and Rook defeated Elgarnan. However, the Blight, released from behind the veil, still threatened all life. It is unclear where Solace was during this time. Was he trapped in the Fade or hiding, regaining strength, because he only appeared during the final battle? The concept art suggests that at least 5 endings were planned for the game. If Rook failed to sever her bond with Solace and died, Solace would obtain the cube containing the Titan's souls and complete his ritual. A magical explosion would occur, stripping the elves of their physical forms and turning them back into spirits. they would ascend to the Golden City with Solace. The Blight, however, would remain in Thedas, dooming the world. But at least the elves would have a chance to rebuild their empire in the Fade as Solace intended.
I would have entered the Fade using the mark you now bear. Then I would have torn down the veil. As this world burned in the raw chaos, I would have restored the world of my time. The world of the elves.
There was also an ending like in Veilguard that could be seen if certain conditions were met. Solace binds the veil to himself, restoring it and sealing the Blight within his own body. Interestingly, this act requires him to tranquilize himself. Next was a similar ending, but with key differences. Solace tranquilizes the surviving Gilan 9 and then himself. Unlike the previous ending, blue hues resembling lyrium appear around him. Perhaps in this version, Solace uses the Titan's trapped souls to free them. The veil is restored, and the Blight is contained. The fourth ending? If Rook failed to convince Solace that his views were misguided, a battle would ensue. Solace would be forcibly bound to the veil. Defeated and broken, he would alone retreat through the gates of the Black City. And the final ending, the secret one, I think. Solace uses veil magic to resurrect a Titan. Once again, it is unclear what purpose this served. Was the Titan meant to help fight the Blight, battle the gods, or become a new guardian of Thedas? Early sketches showed dwarves and Grey Wardens performing some kind of ceremony on the palm of a dead Titan. This could hint at a secret ending where Solace restores the souls he stole and destroyed centuries ago. Honestly, I would really like to read the draft scripts for this ending to understand what such a turn of events could have led to. While playing Veilguard, I couldn't help but notice how inconsistent and disjointed the main storyline felt. The first 20 minutes, up until the arrival at the lighthouse, were decent enough, but everything came to a halt once we entered the Arlatan forest in search of Bellara. The plot felt as though it was bouncing aimlessly from one point to another. The pacing became incredibly erratic. One moment we're here, the next we're over there. Story missions felt more like side quests, with some lasting as little as 3 minutes. I think it was in Chapter 4. At times, I had no idea what was even happening. Adding to this, the two elven gods, supposedly the greatest threat Thedas has ever faced, came off more as a comedic side note. Everyone reacts to them with an air of casual indifference. Elven gods? Oh, how terrifying. Anyway, can you help us deal with the Kunari and save Treviso? Logic, especially in the first half of the game, is almost non-existent.
Hey!
But why?
However, things take a sharp turn with the attack on Weishaupt Fortress. That's when the real stakes kick in, confrontations with the gods, large-scale battles, and the first major losses and defeats. Unfortunately, the narrative slows down again in chapters 9 and 10 as you're forced to hunt down the gods and rescue captured elves. But starting from chapter 11 all the way to the finale, when story missions finally come one after another, the plot becomes engaging. It's fascinating to follow the events unfolding on screen, and some characters even become genuinely sympathetic. While playing, I couldn't shake the feeling that the opening 20 minutes and the final third of the game were reworked multiple times by the writers. Meanwhile, it's as if the first half of the story was barely touched, like someone came up with a basic concept and just left it as is. Looking at the original draft of the story I reconstructed, which dates back to 2015, it is clear that Veilguard essentially begins with the finale of the second act. Just think about it, only about a third of the initial concept made it into the final product. That third became the opening and closing segments of Veilguard, and unsurprisingly, these are the best developed parts of the game. Everything else seems to have been tacked on later, just to pad out the narrative, and the result, frankly, is less than stellar. So, if you have played Veilguard and found yourself wondering why the finale feels so much better polished compared to the beginning and middle, now you have your answer. This concept art showcases Rook's companions, Taash, Davrin, Lucanus, Calpurnia, and Harding, locked in a heated argument. Meanwhile, Rook stands at the center, intently studying a board filled with images of characters, events, and other key elements that the heroes are meant to uncover throughout their journey. But take a closer look at the room's windows. Those steel frames with rivets resemble portholes or observation windows on the upper decks of a submarine. In the fourth installment, Rook and her companions were supposed to travel across the northern reaches of Thedas. They would operate covertly, avoiding Solace's agents while working to disrupt his plans. Initially, the idea was for the heroes to travel aboard a ship, but an even more unconventional concept emerged, a submarine. Later concept art revealed this unique vessel, which even had a name, Dumat, after the first archdemon. Dumat wasn't meant to be just a mode of transportation. It was envisioned as a fully functional mobile base where the characters could rest, strategize, and reflect on their experiences. Some concept art even depicts a romantic moment between Rook and Davrin. They were shown kissing against the backdrop of the sea, standing on the submarine's observation deck. And here, another piece of art shows the entire team, like Harding, Davrin, Taash, Calpurnia, and Lucanus relaxing on Dumat's bridge. Veilguard was also supposed to feature at least one underwater location, a mysterious prison housing an enigmatic captive. And if you thought that this scene, where the dark screen abruptly cuts to an underwater shot, was odd, you're not alone. I believe that this fragment is all that remains of this idea. It seems the Rook's team was meant to reach the prison aboard the submarine. The only remnant of Dumat in the final game is the interior of Rook's room. Look closely. You will notice the windows don't resemble an aquarium. They are portholes. It is likely that part of the design was already completed when BioWare revisited their concept and shifted from Dreadwolf to Veilguard. Instead of discarding the assets, they repurposed them. And since the game is set in the Fade, where the laws of reality are flexible, they simply inserted this piece of a ship into the narrative. In the end, this intriguing and imaginative concept was also left confined to the drawing board. Besides this, the developers intended to redeem themselves for Inquisition's lackluster transportation system. Remember the horses? While functional, they were so rudimentary that most players barely used them. So, in the fourth game, they plan to reintroduce mounts, this time griffins. Rook, at the very least, had her own griffin, which she was seen riding back to the ship in concept art. One note even mentions the possibility of aerial combat on griffin back. Although the griffins weren't entirely scrapped, they ended up being reduced to a part of Davrin's storyline.
So, I'm non-binary.
This is where the fun begins.
Well, what is the one element in Veilguard that drew criticism from all sides? Correct, the companions, specifically Taash. Honestly, when I first started playing, I made a decision right away. The moment the dialogue option for romancing her appeared, I would go for it. Yes, I was aware of all the background noise surrounding her character, but I decided to dive in head first. After all, I wasn't about to romance a freckled, pint-sized Abby. And Nev, well, let's just say that she reminded me of a certain actress, for reasons I won't elaborate on. So, Taash it was. Much like the narrative, which had its share of bumps and inconsistencies, the same could be said for Taash's characterization. Everything about her suggests that her dramatic arc was originally centered on her multiculturalism, not her multi-gender identity. Take a look at her early concept art. Here's a snippet of her original biography. As someone who grew up in the free-spirited, multicultural county of Rivain, but was raised to respect the Kunari heritage, Taash is a dragon hunter who walks in two worlds. Does it mention anything about her gender identity? Exactly, nothing. Taash's design is bold, striking, very sensual. Her stance radiates confidence and strength. She has a provocative gaze and exudes self-assuredness in both her power and beauty. Now, who else fits this description and hails from Rivain? That's right, Isabella. Taash could have inherited these traits from her. For the Kunari, every aspect of life is dictated by the Kun. To them, the Kun is the ultimate moral compass, and any society that rejects it is doomed to decadence and misery. Converting such societies to the Kun is seen as a way to liberate them from their own suffering. In Dragon Age Origins, we had Sten, a Kunari through and through, but one who came to respect the Warden. In Dragon Age 2, we had Talus, an elf raised under the Kun teachings, loyal to it to the very end. In Inquisition, there was the Iron Bull, a member of the Ben Hasrath, a Kunari organization devoted to religious outreach and intelligence. For the record, Talus was also part of the Ben Hasrath, though the contrast between her and Bull is striking. And then there is Taash. While born a Kunari, she was raised in Rivain, a land where countless cultures and beliefs intertwine. I would wager that her story was originally meant to revolve around her rejection of the Kun. Her mother might have pressured her to adhere to its teachings, while Taash herself would have dismissed it as a foolish religion. She might argue that being born a woman doesn't mean you're confined to one role. You could be a warrior, a merchant, or anything else you choose. Freedom of choice.
You are a Grey Warden, so it follows that you can't be a woman. Women are priests, artisans, shopkeepers, or farmers. They don't fight.
Taash's defining traits could have been her headstrong, impulsive nature. She'd have a fiery spirit, figuratively speaking, unlike the literal interpretation we saw in Veilguard. Here is concept art where Rook's group infiltrates Tevinter, and Taash looks ready to charge at someone while Lucanus and Emmerich try to maintain composure, and Rook nervously pulls her hood over her head. If you strip away all the gender discourse, what you get is a solid character arc. In the end, we could have helped Taash either embrace her Qunari roots and learn to approach the Khorne's traditions with greater composure, or reject them entirely and adopt Riveni values. This is just my personal opinion, and I beg you YouTube, don't ban me for this. Patrick Weeks is a talented writer. He created characters like Jack, Tali, Kasumi, and Morden, as well as the Rannoch and Tushonka storylines in Mass Effect 3. He also worked on Dragon Age Inquisition, where we got Cole, the Iron Bull, and Solace thanks to him. I don't follow his personal life, it's none of my business. I don't know why he uses they, them pronouns, because I was taught in elementary school that one person is referred to as he, him, while multiple people are referred to as they, them. If a single person prefers to be called they, then they should see a doctor, as this could be considered a split personality according to the same knowledge taught in primary school. But, okay, that is his choice. However, as a professional writer, he's obligated to follow certain principles and not mix personal matters with his work. I live in Eastern Europe. Topics like guess my gender or non-binary identities remain unfamiliar to most people here, myself included. It's something we don't understand in this part of the world. Perhaps these issues are more relevant in Patrick's environment. Maybe there's even a logical reason behind this behavior. But let's look at another example, David Guider. David, as a person of homosexual orientation, was the lead writer for Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, responsible for crafting the series' lore and narrative design. Before that, he worked on Baldur's Gate 2, Knights of the Old Republic, and Neverwinter Nights. He created characters like Zevran, Alistair, Morrigan, Kaelin, Duncan, Cassandra, Fenris, Dorian, and many more. And did any of his characters dwell on how hard it is to be gay in Thedas? You may say, yes, Dorian. But hey, wait a sec. Dorian's tragedy wasn't about his sexuality. As a member of a wealthy Tevinter family, Dorian grew up arrogant, embodying the stereotype of a pompous, condescending Tevinter noble, until he met Geryon Alexius. Inspired by the Mage's intellect and actions, Dorian finally re-evaluated his behavior and became a better person. In Inquisition, if your approval with Dorian is low, he will call out the Inquisitor for their decisions, but stay on to see the fight through, determined to prove that ancient magisters aren't representative of modern Tevinter.
I do think you blunder about, Inquisitor, thrashing like a caged dragon at everything that displeases you. I still believe Corypheus needs to be stopped, and that I need to be here to help stop him.
After victory, he will joke during the celebration about a laundress hugging him like a hero who helped defeat the enemy. Later, he will share how a blacksmith, who initially spat at the sight of him, admitted that maybe not all Tevinters are dishonorable. "That's all thanks to you," he will say, to which the Inquisitor can reply that Dorian earned it himself, paving the way for others to follow his example.
I was passing through the hall this morning and a serving girl saw me and squealed. Actually squealed, dropped her laundry and everything, such a mess. She was completely breathless. You were at the battle with the evil one, weren't you? I didn't even get a chance to answer. She hugged me. Hugged me. This is your influence.
Yes, Dorian's sexuality was part of who he was, but it wasn't his defining trait, unlike Taash. I don't think Patrick Weeks is solely to blame for the final result. While he's been the lead writer for Dragon Age since 2015, he has colleagues, department heads, and studio executives who share responsibility for the outcome. But if personal frustrations start bleeding into character arcs, well, it is a cause for concern. And fine if it had been handled with subtlety. Taash could have been an amazing character. I have a weakness for strong women. Hello Karlach, and honestly, it stings. I've been wanting a female Qunari companion since Dragon Age 2, but as they say, be careful what you wish for. Finally, I will briefly go over some of the other companions. Calpurnia, who was supposed to play a significant role, was entirely removed from the narrative. Instead, her character concept was reworked into a new one, resulting in Nev Gallus. Lucanus initially looked a bit different in early drafts, but his final appearance turned out to be well crafted. However, in the world of Dragon Age, the fear of demons and possessed mages has historically been so intense that it often served as a foundation for major conflicts in the series. There was a character in Dragon Age 2, some of you might remember him, possessed by the spirit of justice. His name was Anders.
No!
You will never take another mage as you took him.
Emphasis on justice. Now compare that to how a person possessed by the demon of spite behaves.
Back, demon! No further! Isn't standing up to them supposed to work?
Let Lucanus go! Don't make us hurt both of you!
What's going on? Lucanus?
It's not Lucanus, it's the demon. It's taking him over. He's trying to leave.
Smells like jam and brimstone.
It's amusing, don't you think? Emmerich and Davrin made it to the final version with minimal changes. Their storyline, by the way, ended up being my favorite of the bunch. However, Davrin's personal quest once again portrayed the Grey Wardens as pompous fools. This trend started in Inquisition and has unfortunately continued in Veilguard. One of Veilguard's weakest aspects was its locations. Concept art showcased Tevinter's characteristic traits, class oppression, slavery, hopelessness, and poverty, starkly contrasting with impunity and luxury. I expected to see a place embodying the essence of blood magic, decadence, wealth, cruelty, and disregard for human life. I thought we would dive into political intrigue between the great houses and explore the seediest corners of the capital. So where was all that? In my opinion, Treviso fits this description far better. Interestingly, the second act of the game likely intended for Rook to spark a slave uprising. Or for instance, to visit the grand bathhouses of Ventus. Just look at the interior and surroundings. The atmosphere conveyed in the concept art is worlds apart from what Veilguard ultimately showed. What personally drove me crazy about the in-game locations were the enormous towers in the background. Towers, towers, columns, and more towers. When I reached the mountains with Harding, I felt relieved. Finally, just nature to admire. The factions also suffered. I chose the Crow origin because I loved Zevran from the first game, but maybe these Veilguard Crows aren't the same ones Zevran described. They are missing only a lollipop to complete their vibe. They're also kind, sweet, and thoughtful. These are, essentially, Antiva's best pals, but not a guild of assassins striking fear into half the continent. Cal Shirok also made it into the final version in a reduced form, tied to Harding's personal quest. Originally, like the Crows and Grey Wardens, it was supposed to be a separate faction. Once again, such a shame. This might be an unpopular opinion, but my favorite location in Dragon Age Origins was Orzammar. I would have loved to see something similar here, but on a grander scale, and unfortunately, this was yet another missed opportunity. Honestly, I could go on discussing Veilguard, sharing my thoughts and ideas that in my opinion could have improved the game. For instance, how Ballara's character could have been fleshed out, or how past characters could have been integrated, retaining the option to carry over decisions and events from previous games. But that would take another half hour, if not longer, and this isn't a review of the game. It is more a reflection on what Veilguard could have been if the developers had stuck to the original direction for the Dragon Age universe. My opinion is that the game doesn't deserve the wave of hate it received from all sides. Yeah, Veilguard has plenty of flaws, and in terms of story, it is probably the weakest part of the series. However, technically, it's definitely well made. There are also bright spots in its narrative. Yes, there aren't many of them, but it's not just a single standout episode for the whole game. I also enjoyed some of the banter between the companions. Personally, I had fun pressing buttons on the 4th difficulty level, even though the combat wasn't polished and lacked tactical depth. The problem with the gameplay is exactly the same as with the story. We got only a third of what we could have seen. So now we're waiting for Avowed from Obsidian, though their marketing is peculiar, constantly emphasizing what the game won't have. By the way, pre-orders are open, but I must admit, I don't have a good feeling about it. And that's all for today. I hope this video, though not the cheeriest, was interesting for you. I hope you can imagine, using your imagination, what kind of game we could have gotten if things had turned out differently. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, and subscription to the channel would be greatly appreciated, as it helps promote the video and supports the channel's overall growth. And for now, I wish you all a good morning, day, evening, or night. Till next time.